The air in the cramped forward bunker of Trench 11 Alpha was a suffocating cocktail. It stank of ozone from the overworked Voxcaster, the sour tang of week-old sweat, baked into fatigues the faint coppery smell of blood from the wounded in the next alcove, and the ever-present grit of pulverized rock. It was the standard-issued scent of war on a fortress world. Sergeant Kalen stood as still as the statues of the saints he no longer prayed to. His Cadian pattern flak armor, scarred by shrapnel and lass burns, was nevertheless immaculate. Every strap tightened to regulation, every plate wiped clean of mud. His face, a harsh landscape carved by 30 years of war, was a mask of rigid, uncompromising piety. His eyes, the color of cold iron, swept over his squad. The Cadian Vindicators. 10 men crouched or kneeling in the dim, flickering light of a single glow globe. They mirrored his posture, their bodies tense, their knuckles white on the stocks of their laser guns. Bayonets were already fixed, gleaming faintly. Kalen, his voice was not a shout, but a low, rasping monotone that cut through the distant rumble of artillery. The litany of hate. From the beginning. Trooper Varus, you will begin. Trooper Varus, barely 19, swallowed hard. His throat was dry. Varus' voice trembling but gaining strength, a spiritu dominatus domine libra knows. Squad a ragged chorus from the lightning and the tempest, our emperor deliver us. Kalen, his own voice joining a bedrock of granite beneath their shaking faith. From the scourge of the traitor, our emperor deliver us. From the blasphemy of the heretic, our emperor deliver us. From the foulness of the mutant, our emperor deliver us. Squad. The chant grew, becoming a rhythmic, angry growl from the whoredom of the witch. Our emperor deliver us from the damnation of the alien. Our emperor deliver us. Kalen, his eyes closed, his mind focusing the words into a single point of burning light. A furore chaos. Domine libra nos. Squad a furore chaos, our emperor deliver us. The final words echoed in the sudden silence. Kalen's eyes snapped open, the iron gaze pinned each man in turn. Kalen, we are his shield. We are his wrath. We are the stone upon which the darkness breaks. The Cadian 88th does not bend. The Vindicators do not break. You will hold this line. You will hold this line not because you fear death, for death is a temporary state. You will hold this line because you hate the enemy more than you love your own transient lives. Your hate is a sacrament. Your hate is righteous. It is pure. It is the divine and holy gift from the Master of mankind on the golden throne itself. It is the only gift we need. Do you understand me? Varus, his tremor gone, replaced by a cold fury. Yes, Sergeant. Kalen, hate is your armor. Discipline is your sword. In his name we will cleanse this soil. In his name we will slaughter the unclean. Squad, in his name. Kalen slammed a fresh power pack into his laser gun. The click-clack was a mechanical amen, a final, unalterable promise. He believed every syllable. The Emperor demanded sacrifice, and he would give it. The Imperium demanded order, and he would enforce it. The enemy demanded death, and he would deliver it with righteous, cleansing hatred. It was simple. It was pure. It was the only truth in a galaxy drowning in lies. He was a soldier of the Imperium. That was all. Narrator. A voice like grinding stones, ancient and indifferent. But across the seething psychic gulf of unreality, beyond the veil of mathematics and sanity, another throne watched. It was not a throne of gleaming, life-sustaining gold. It was a mountain of bone, a citadel of skulls piled high enough to pierce the bleeding skies of the Empyrean, each one a testament, each one a trophy from a forgotten champion or a slaughtered world. The entity that sat upon this throne did not listen to the litany of hate. It did not care for the sniveling prayers of mortals. Piety was weakness. Faith was a delusion. The Lord of the Skull Throne, the God of Blood, the Hunter of Souls, did not deal in complex dogma or labyrinthine creeds. His entire philosophy was written in a single, simple, honest word. Blood. He did not grant comforting visions to weeping priests or whispering promises to the desperate. He granted strength to the arms that swung the axe. He did not ask for whispered confessions in shadowed alcoves or tithes of coin. He demanded bellowed war cries on open fields and the arterial spray of the worthy. This was Khorne, the blood god, the lord of rage, the embodiment of all violence from the tectonic clash of worlds to the assassin's precise strike. He did not offer salvation, for salvation was a lie told by the weak to enslave the strong. He did not promise paradise, for paradise was a coward's dream of inaction. He offered only the searing absolute truth of the moment, the purity of the kill, the honesty of absolute unrestrained violence. While the billions of faithful of the Imperium begged their distant silent corpse god for deliverance, the followers of Khorne took it. They were not given strength in hollow blessings. They earned it by slaying the strong. They did not pray for victory. They butchered their way to it, forging their own destiny in the crucible of slaughter. In a universe built on the hypocrisy of saviors and the decay of empires, the blood god was the only honest power. He did not care why the blood flowed. He did not care if it was spilled in his name or in the name of his most hated foe. He did not care if it was the blood of a saint or the blood of a sinner. He only cared that it flowed. The trench whistle shrieked a high-pitched mechanical scream that sliced through the din. Kalen fixed bayonets over the top, vindicators with me, for Cardia, for the Emperor. Kalen was the first one over the parapet, his boots finding purchase in the muddy embankment as he clawed his way into the churning hell of no man's land. The world dissolved into a strobing nightmare of noise and crimson flashes. Autogun fire stitched the air. Artillery bursts walked across the field, turning men into red mist. A chaos cultist, its face a tattooed mask of ecstatic madness, its eyes wide with warp-fueled frenzy, lunged at him from a shell crater. It bellowed, swinging a rusted chain cleaver that rattled and smoked. Kalen didn't flinch. He didn't even pause. His movements were an economy of violence, a deadly catechism drilled into his very bones by the Cadian scholar. Step left inside the arc of the swing. Bring the lasgun stock up to block the descending arm. Pivot. Bayonet thrust to the throat, a precise, powerful lunge. Twist the blade, severing the spine. He kicked the gurgling, twitching body off his bayonet without a second glance. Kalen bellowing over the roar, Varus on my right flank, suppressing fire, 3-round bursts, Korvax grenade, that heavy stubber now. He was a machine of Cadian discipline, a focal point of order in the heart of total chaos. He directed his squad, called targets, and killed with a ruthless, detached efficiency. His lasgun barked, each shot a precise red dot of light that found an eye socket, a gap in patchwork armor, a screaming throat. He was death by regulation. They crashed into the opposing trench line, a tide of grim-faced khaki against a mob of shrieking fanatics. It was a slaughterhouse. The fighting was shoulder to shoulder, blade to blade. Kalen's bayonet snapped, and he reversed his rifle, using the stock as a club, crushing a jawbone. He found himself face to face with the cultist leader, a hulking brute in patched-together plate armor, wielding a massive two-handed hammer. The brute roared a sound more animal than human, and swung the hammer in a devastating horizontal arc. Kalen to himself, a whisper too slow. Kalen ducked the wind of the blow, tearing at his helmet, the impact shattering the trench wall behind him. He dropped his useless lasgun, drew his 18-inch Cadian pattern combat knife, and lunged inside the creature's guard. The brute tried to bring the hammer back, but Kalen was already there. He drove the blade up hard under the armpit, through the thinner armor, seeking the heart. He put his entire body weight behind it. The brute stared, its maddened eyes suddenly wide with surprise, before it collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. Kalen stood over the corpse's chest, heaving the grip of his knife slick with hot blood. The trench was secure for now. His remaining men were cheering, rallying to him, their faces smeared with grime and gore. He had done his duty. He was serving the Emperor. He had upheld the honor of Cardia. But as the combat high, the pure, undiluted adrenaline coursed through his veins, a small, dark ember glowed hot and bright, deep within his soul. He looked at the blood on his gauntlets, the steaming carnage around him. He felt the thumping, primal rhythm of his own heart, a war drum pounding against his ribs. This feeling, the moment of the kill, the absolute undeniable certainty of his strength overpowering another's, the clean, simple finality of it. He hated the enemy. He loved the Emperor. But deep down in a place he would never ever admit, a place of pure animal instinct. He loved this. The seed was planted. The victory in Trench 11 Alpha lasted precisely 48 minutes. It was long enough for Kalen to redistribute ammunition from the dead, long enough for the Medici designate to stabilize the two men who still had pulses, long enough for Trooper Korvax to light a trembling, celebratory low stick. The air still hummed with the aftershock of the charge, but a familiar, weary quiet had begun to settle. Kalen was cleaning the gore from his knife, his disciplined hands moving in sharp, practiced motions. Then the ground sang. It was not the familiar, percussive crump of artillery. It was a low, resonant, bone-deep moan, as if the planet itself was being torn in two. Kalen froze, his hand tightening on the hilt of his knife. Korvax pointed a shaking finger upwards, his low stick dropping forgotten from his lips. "Korvax, Sergeant. By the throne. What is that?" The sky, a dirty, bruised purple from the constant orbital smog, was cracking. Not with lightning, but with vast burning fissures that stretched from horizon to horizon. From these wounds, fire rained down. Not shells, not drop pods. It was the planet's own orbital defense platforms, the glorious iron ring that had held back the darkness for 10,000 years, now falling as kilometers-long meteors. Molten adamantium, white-hot and screaming, tore through the upper atmosphere. Kalen, his voice was tight, a knot of pure incomprehension, his discipline failing. "This is not possible. Get under cover." It was a meaningless order. Where was cover from the sky itself? He was a sergeant of the line. This was the warfare of gods. He stood frozen, a statue of disbelief, and watched as one of the largest fragments, the remains of the Starfleet Vigilant, slammed into Caesar Krell, the hive city on the horizon, the city he had been born in. He did not hear the impact. The sound was too vast to be processed by human ears. It was a silent, blossoming flower of pure, white-hot annihilation. A flash of light that erased 10 million souls from existence in a single heartbeat. The shockwave that followed seconds later was not wind. It was a physical wall of displaced reality. It hit the trench line like the fist of an angry god. Kalen and his squad were thrown, their world vanishing into a roaring vortex of darkness, pain, and pulverized rock. He awoke to the taste of his own blood and concrete dust. His world was blackness punctuated by the high-pitched whine of his own tinnitus. His body was a constellation of agony. His helmet's auto-senses were dead, the visor cracked. He fumbled for his throat mic, his gauntleted fingers thick and clumsy. Kalen coughing, spitting a slurry of dust and blood. "Vindicators, Vindicators report Kalen's sound-off status." Only static replied. A thick, hissing static, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. He fought against the rubble pinning his legs, a new kind of panic rising, not fear of death but fear of failure, of dying alone in the dark, his duty unfulfilled. And then a sound. A miracle. The vox bead in his ear, shielded by the helmet's casing, crackled. A voice distant and tinny, drowning in distortion, reading from a pre-recorded script. "Vox voice, crackle. Andatory fallback order. All surviving Cadian 88th elements, hiss, rendezvous at rally point Omega Zeta, regroup for planetary extraction, priority Alpha. The Emperor protects." The message looped. Extraction. Hope sharp and painful lanced through Kalen. There was a plan. The High Command was still functioning. The Emperor had provided discipline, orders. He had to get to Omega Zeta. He had to find his men. Kalen roaring into the darkness, his voice raw, Varus Korvax. On me, we have our orders. Fall back to Omega Zeta. He clawed his way free, his armor groaning in protest. He pushed a slab of ferrocrete off his chest, the rebar scraping against his pauldron, and staggered to his feet. The world was gone. The sky was a suffocating shroud of black soot, lit only by the raging continent-spanning fires that burned on the horizon. The air was a toxic soup of promethium and atomized rock. His rebreather kicked in its stale, recycled air a small metallic mercy. He looked towards the coordinates of Omega Zeta. He knew this place. A fortified command bastion 3 clicks south. It was no longer there. In its place was a glowing, steaming crater half a kilometer wide. The ground around it was a sea of shimmering, superheated glass and cooling magma. The rally point was the epicenter of a strategic orbital strike. The order wasn't a lifeline. It was an automated echo, a ghost message sent to a graveyard. They were not being rescued. They were being archived. Kalen, Omega, Zeta. He sank to his knees, his combat knife slipping from his numb fingers. The Vox looped again. Regroup for planetary extraction. His laser gun was gone, shattered. His squad was gone, buried or atomized. The city was gone. The orbital platforms were gone. Cadia was gone. Kalen whispering to the dead air, to the dead Vox. You left us. You left us. The litany of hate, the righteous fury, the promise of the golden throne. It all evaporated, leaving a cold, hollow, sickening void. Discipline was a lie. Order was a joke. His entire life, his every sacrifice, every man he had sent to his death in the Emperor's name. It was a meaningless gesture in the face of this abandonment. The ground shuddered again, a final catastrophic tremor that split the earth. The lip of the crater he was near gave way, and Kalen tumbled back into the darkness, a rain of debris burying him once more. This time his leg was caught. A thick, jagged shaft of rebar had pierced the plasteel of his greave, punching through synth muscle and sinew, pinning him against a collapsed bulkhead. He was trapped. Truly trapped. He tried to pull free the pain, a white-hot scream that fogged his vision. The rebar held. He was helpless. Darkness fell. Not the natural fall of night, but the suffocating blanket of a world-ending dust cloud. And in that darkness the true scavengers emerged, the things that thrived on ruin. He heard them first, a guttural wet chuckling, the clank of crude, rusted metal on stone. Then a human scream, a voice he knew thin and terrified. Varys from somewhere nearby, muffled by debris. No. Please, Sergeant Kalen, help me, Emperor. Please, no. No. Kalen's blood turned to ice. He tore at the rebar, screaming his own voice, a raw, broken thing. The metal would not budge. He could hear the scuffling, the tearing of fabric. He could hear the low, barking laughter of chaos marauders, filthy, debased humans who had turned to the dark gods in the planet's final moments. Marauder Voice 1, a wet, slavering sound. Look at this one, still pretty. Still got his shiny pin. Marauder Voice 2, a guttural, hooting laugh. The corpse god ain't watching now, little soldier. Your world is ours. Varys, a shriek of pure, unadulterated terror and agony that cut Kalen to the bone, a sound that would never leave him. Ah, gah! The scream was cut short by a wet, heavy thud followed by more laughter. They were... Kalen realized with a stomach-churning horror. They were pulling him apart. Kalen bellowing, smashing his fists against the rebar. His throat tearing. Varys, I'm here, fight, Cadia. But his voice was just another sound in the ruins. The marauders' laughter faded as they moved on, dragging their prize with them. Silence returned, broken only by Kalen's own ragged, sobbing breaths. He was alone, helpless. He, the sergeant, the rock, the exemplar of Cadian discipline. He had listened to his trooper die. He couldn't move. He couldn't help. He couldn't even grant him a clean death. His faith already cracked, now shattered into a million pieces. The Emperor hadn't protected Varys. The Emperor hadn't protected Cadia. The Emperor hadn't protected him. His litanies were empty words. His discipline was a fool's game. All his hatred, all that righteous, holy hatred, had been pointless. It had saved no one. He stopped pulling at the rebar. He stopped sobbing. He just sat there in the dark, pinned by the corpse of his world. The cold, hollow void inside him began to fill. It filled with something black and thick and monumentally heavy. It wasn't grief. It wasn't despair. It was something far simpler. It was pure. It was undiluted. It was rage, a raw, primal, helpless rage. A rage not for the Emperor, not for Cadia, but for the simple, burning need to inflict pain. A rage that wanted to tear the world apart just as his had been torn. He stared into the blackness, his iron-grey eyes now glowing with a new, terrible light. And for the first time, he did not pray. He just hated. The rage was a furnace. Kalen roared a sound that was no longer human and pulled. The rebar was an unfeeling spike of imperial failure, and he hated it. He hated the concrete that held it, the gravity that pinned him, the world that had dared to die around him. He put his boot against the bulkhead, placed his 2 gauntlets on the jagged metal shaft piercing his leg, and used the pain as fuel. Agony, white, hot, and blinding, lanced up his spine, but it was distant. It was just another sensation less important than the all-consuming need to be free. There was a sound of tearing plasteel, a wet, sickening rip of synth muscle and his own flesh, and then he was loose. He fell forward onto his hands and knees, panting his ruined leg, screaming in protest. Blood, dark in the soot-choked twilight, poured from the wound, steaming in the toxic air. He barely noticed. He had moved. He was free. That was all that mattered. He tore a strip of fabric from the tattered remains of his own uniform sash, the red sash of Acadian sergeant, a mark of honor he now viewed with burning contempt, and packed it roughly into the wound. The pain was a dull, angry throb, a companion to the larger rage that filled his chest. He found a length of shattered pipe to use as a crude walking stick and hauled himself upright. He began to walk. He was no longer Sergeant Kalen of the 808th. He was just a thing that moved, a creature of ruin propelled by spite. The landscape was a broken, monochrome hell. Spires of twisted metal clawed at the black sky. Rivers of chemical sludge and promethium fires choked the streets. The air was a razor in his lungs. For days, or perhaps weeks, time had become a meaningless concept measured only in the cycles of his own agonizing hunger. He wandered. His training was a ghost, a muscle memory that kept him moving from cover to cover, but his purpose was gone. He was not seeking a rendezvous point. He was not looking for survivors to command. He was a scavenger, an animal. The hunger was the first true enemy. It was worse than the pain in his leg, worse than the toxic air. It was a hollow, clawing void that gnawed at his insides, demanding to be filled. His regulation ration packs were long gone, buried with his squad. He ate nutrient paste scraped from the floor of a wrecked chimera, so old it was almost tasteless. He chewed on strips of grox leather boiled in a puddle of chemical water that made him violently ill. He was dying. Then he saw him. Through the red haze of a dust storm, another figure limping just as he was. Khaki fatigues, a lasgun cracked and useless, clutched like a talisman. A Valhallan trooper by the look of the greatcoat, his face covered in soot and weeping sores. The Valhallan saw Kalen at the same time, and raised his weapon, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. Kalen, his voice a dry croak. "Stand down. I have no quarrel with you." Valhallan trooper, eyes wide with feral terror. "Liar! Cultist! Heretic! Stay back!" The Valhallan's eyes darted to Kalen's side, to the small, scorched ration tin Kalen had spent half a day digging out of a collapsed supply depot. It was his last one. It was everything. "Valhallan trooper, give me the food. In the Emperor's name, I am starving." Kalen, he stepped back, his hand instinctively moving to the knife that was no longer there. He gripped his pipe instead. "No." Valhallan trooper, please, he provides. We must share. He provides. The words were a spark on dry tinder. Kaelin looked at this sniveling, weeping wreck, a reflection of what the Emperor's faith made men into. Helpless, begging, weak. The same weakness that had let Varys die. Kaelin, he provides nothing. The Valhallan shrieked a sound of pure, desperate madness and lunged. He didn't use the laser gun as a club. He just ran at Kaelin, his hands clawed. It was pathetic. It was disgusting. Kaelin's training took over, but it was a twisted, brutalized version of it. The old Kaelin would have disarmed, disabled, contained. The new Kaelin simply sidestepped the clumsy charge, letting the man's own momentum carry him past. As he stumbled, Kaelin raised the heavy iron pipe and brought it down across the back of the Valhallan's skull. There was a wet, heavy crack. The man dropped without a sound, his body twitching once on the ash-covered ground. Kaelin stood over him, his chest heaving. He had just killed a soldier of the Imperium, a brother in arms. He felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. He felt a flicker of contempt. The man was weak, and he was dead. That was the new litany. He retrieved his ration tin. He did not check the man for supplies. He did not grant him the Emperor's mercy. He simply sat down a few feet from the cooling corpse, pried the tin open, and began to eat the cold, greasy protein mush inside. He ate it with his bloody, unwashed hands, staring at the body as he chewed. He was alive. The man was not. This was the only truth that mattered. Duty was a luxury for those who weren't starving. As the last of the food was gone, as the gnawing in his stomach finally subsided into a dull ache, it happened. He closed his eyes just for a moment and felt it. It was not a voice, it was not a word, it was a pulse. It was a deep, slow, rhythmic thrum in the back of his mind, like a great war drum beating in a vast, dark cavern. It was a sensation, not a thought. It was a feeling of approval, a wave of pure, uncomplicated validation that washed over him, warming his blood. The thump, thump, thump in his head felt like it was coming from his own heart, but magnified, amplified into a physical force. He opened his eyes. The world seemed sharper, the edges of the ruins clearer. The red of the distant fires was more vibrant. He looked at the corpse of the Valhallan. The pulse in his skull intensified. Thump, thump, thump. It was a simple, one-sided conversation. The pulse didn't say, "Good job." It just was good. The act of killing, the act of survival, the dominance he had just displayed, it was correct. The universe, or some part of it, had just nodded in agreement. It didn't ask for his soul. It didn't ask for his prayers. It simply said, yes, this, more. The pulse was a dull throb now, a background rhythm to his own thoughts. It was a restless, agitating presence. It wanted him to move, to act. He pushed himself to his feet, his wounded leg aching, but the rage and the new pulsing energy made the pain trivial. He needed a weapon, a real weapon. The pipe was functional, but it was crude. It lacked finality. He moved through the skeletal remains of a hab block, seeking shelter from an incoming acid rain squall. The walls were covered in the desperate graffiti of a dying populace. The Emperor protects. Death to the traitor. Kadia stands. Empty, meaningless words. Lies. He spat on them. Then, in a deeper, more shadowed part of the ruin, he found a different kind of shrine. The air was thick with the old coppery smell of dried blood. Someone had been here recently. Not scavengers, worshippers. On the central wall, drawn with a crude, massive hand, was a symbol. It was drawn in a thick black-red slurry that could only be arterial blood already flaking and dry. It was an 8-pointed star. But it was not the elegant, symmetrical star of the Chaos Pantheon he had seen in instructional Picts. This was angry. The lines were thick, slashed onto the concrete. 4 of the points were longer, like blades. It was a sigil of pure, directional aggression. The Kaelin of a few weeks ago would have been filled with righteous imperial revulsion. He would have recited the litany of purity, his hand on his aquila. Now he just stared. He felt no disgust. He felt no fear of the heretical. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on what he realized were finger bones scattered on the floor. He reached out his gauntleted hand. The pulse in his head quickened. Thump, 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 thump. It was a hammer pounding in time with his gaze. He traced the bloody, dried line of the symbol. A jolt of static, cold and hot, at the same time ran up his arm. He felt a resonance, a connection. This was not the sigil of a distant, unknowable evil. This was not the intricate, deceitful scrawl of a sorcerer. This was a mark he understood. It was the shape of the rage in his chest. It was the sound of the pulse in his skull. It was the simple, brutal truth of the pipe striking the Valhallan's head. It was the honest, brutal logic of survival. Kill, conquer, be strong. He looked at the symbol, and the symbol looked back. It was not a god. It was a mirror. Kalen turned and walked out of the shrine, leaving the symbol behind. He didn't need to stay. He didn't need to pray to it. He had seen it, and it had seen him. The pulse in his head was stronger now, a constant driving beat. He was no longer just surviving. He was hunting. He needed to kill again. Not for food, not for defense. Just because the pulse was no longer a companion. It was a torment. It was a physical itch beneath his skin, a restless, jarring energy that demanded release. The hunger in his stomach was a dull memory compared to this new, spiritual hunger. The simple, brutal act of killing the Valhallan had only been an appetizer. The resonance with the bloody eight-pointed star had awakened something that now demanded to be fed. He was a weapon on a rack, vibrating with the need to be used. He found his old entrenching tool still strapped to his pack, its edge dulled by digging trenches, not by taking lives. He took it out, its weight familiar in his gauntlets. He needed to hit something. He needed to break something. He was stalking through the skeletal ruins of a manufactorum, the twisted guts of machinery hanging like vines when he heard it. A series of thin, high-pitched shrieks. It was not the battle cry of a soldier or the mad hollering of a fanatic. It was the sound of pure, helpless terror. Kalen moved with a predator's silence, his broken leg a dull ache he simply ignored. He climbed a pile of rubble, looking down into a small plaza littered with the burned-out husks of administrative vehicles. 3 figures were there. Marauders, their armor a patchwork of scavenged flak leather straps and filed down Imperial Aquilas. They were laughing, that same wet, guttural chuckling he remembered from the darkness. The sound that had haunted his waking nightmares. Their prey was a civilian woman, her clothes in tatters, her face a mask of dirt and tears. They had her cornered against a collapsed wall and were toying with her, pushing her back and forth with the barrels of their rusted autopistols. The itch in Kalen's skull exploded into a blinding, white-hot certainty. He did not feel pity for the woman. He did not feel Akkadian's duty to protect the weak. He looked at the 3 marauders, and all he felt was a vast, annihilating contempt. He heard Varys's final scream in their laughter. He saw their weakness, their pathetic, scavenging cruelty, and it was an unpardonable offense. He was not here to save her. He was here to purge them. He didn't form a plan. He didn't check his flanks. He simply stood up on the rubble heap, his silhouette stark against the burning sky, and leapt. He landed among them in a crash of debris and plasteel, his 13-kilo entrenching tool held high. The first marauder was still turning his eyes wide, his mouth open in a surprised "oh," when Kalen brought the sharpened edge of the shovel down. It was Akkadian taut blow, precise and economical, aimed at the neck just below the helmet. The shovel bit deep, severing spine and artery, and the man collapsed in a heap, his auto-pistol clattering on the flagstones. The other 2 reacted. One brought his axe up, the other fumbled with his pistol. They were too slow. They were facing an animal. Kalen roared. It was not a battle cry. It was a raw, mindless bellow of pure fury, a sound torn from his very soul. He ignored the axe-wielder and lunged at the one with the pistol. The man fired the shot, sparking harmlessly off Kalen's pauldron. Kalen slammed the flat of the shovel into the man's face, a brutal, crushing blow that shattered teeth and bone. The marauder screamed and fell back, clutching his ruined jaw. The third, the one with the axe, swung wildly. Kalen ducked under the clumsy blow, the rusted metal head missing his helmet by an inch. He rammed the butt of the shovel's haft into the man's stomach, doubling him over with a grunt. Kalen raised the shovel high, reversed it, and brought the point down like a pickaxe, punching it straight through the man's back, through the scavenged flak plate, pinning him to the ground in a spray of blood. The woman, seeing her chance, scrambled away into the ruins, her sobs fading into the distance. Kalen did not watch her go. He was not finished. He turned to the second marauder, the one with the shattered face. The man was on his knees, trying to beg his words, a bubbling, bloody mess. He held his hands up in a gesture of surrender. Kalen stared at him, his chest heaving, the pulse in his head a screaming, deafening drumbeat. Weak, pathetic, filth. He raised the shovel, and he struck. He brought it down on the man's shoulder, shattering the clavicle. The man shrieked. Kalen struck again, this time at the elbow, severing the arm. And again, and again. He was not killing. He was dismantling. He lost himself in a red haze, each impact a punctuation mark in his litany of rage. He hacked at the man's torso, at his legs, long after the screams had stopped, long after the man was just a pile of bloody meat and rags. He was just getting started. He wrenched his shovel free from the third man's back, the body twitching. The marauder was still alive, gurgling. Kalen stepped on the man's neck, pinning him. He looked down into the man's terrified, dying eyes. He saw Varus. He saw the laughing. He saw the Emperor's hollow promise. Kalen, his voice was an unrecognizable, guttural rasp. He began to chop. He hacked at the man's limbs, his body, his head screaming with every blow, the shovel rising and falling in a tireless, manic rhythm. He was a machine built for butchery, fueled by a bottomless well of hate. He hacked until the Axeman was as unrecognizable as the other one, until the plaza floor was a glistening, steaming swamp of gore, until his own arms burned with the exertion. Then silence. Kalen stood in the center of the carnage, his body shaking. His black Cadian fatigues were soaked, his gauntlets dripping. The shovel was a heavy, mangled wreck in his hands, clogged with viscera and scraps of bone. He was breathing in huge, gulping sobs. The world was utterly still save for the drip, drip, drip of blood from his weapon. He looked at what he had done. The sheer unrestrained savagery of it. There was no tactic here, no discipline. This was not the righteous hate of the Emperor. This was a monster's work. The screaming, frantic pulse in his skull, the agonizing itch finally subsided. It receded, the tension flowing out of his body with every ragged breath. In its place, a new sensation. It was a deep, resonant purr, a low, satisfied growl that seemed to vibrate from his bones outward. The void that Cadia's fall had left was for a moment full. He felt no remorse, no guilt, no horror. He felt sated. He felt strong. His arms ached, but it was the good ache of hard labor. He had been a tool of imperial policy. Now he was a force of his own will. He had taken their lives not for duty, not for survival, but because he wanted to. Because they were weak, and he was not. He dropped the ruined shovel. It landed in the blood pool with a wet, heavy splash. He felt the cold air on his face, and for the first time since he had crawled from the rubble, Kalen felt a moment of perfect, terrible peace. The peace of the slaughter lasted for an entire day, but the purring satisfaction soon faded, replaced by the familiar gnawing itch. The pulse had returned quieter this time, but more insistent. It was a hunger that demanded escalation. Butchering 3 pathetic scavengers was not enough. It was a taste and amuse-bouche, and the thing inside him now craved a feast. He needed real combat. He needed a real enemy. He craved the challenge of the strong. He moved toward the sounds of gunfire, no longer a Cadian sergeant avoiding contact, but a predator drawn to a kill. He found them at the edge of the shattered manufactorum district, where where the ruins gave way to a vast open plaza of cracked ferrocrete. They were a wall of crimson and brass, at least 20 of them. Khorne berserkers. Their power armor was a nightmarish perversion of the sacred Astartes plate, painted a deep arterial red and adorned with jagged spikes, chains, and freshly flensed skulls. Their horned helmets modeled on the snarling visage of their god tracked the plaza. They were butchering a pocket of surviving Imperial Guard Valhallan remnants who had fortified a collapsed hab block. It was not a battle, it was an extermination. The berserkers moved with a terrifying, bounding grace, their chain axes roaring like captive predators. They didn't use cover, they were the cover. Laser gun fire, which had been Kaelin's gospel, sparked and vanished against their thick plate, barely even scratching the paint. Kaelin watched from the ruins, his heart pounding, but it was not with fear, it was with envy. He watched their unrestrained, joyous fury. He saw their absolute strength, their utter disdain for the pathetic tactics of the weak. This was not the desperate, scavenging violence of the marauders. This was the art of the kill perfected. This was what he craved. He was so intent on the slaughter that he didn't hear the two who had circled the perimeter. A heavy, gauntleted hand slammed onto his shoulder, spinning him around and pinning him against a rock-crete pillar. His head cracked against the stone, his vision swimming. A second berserker stood before him, its chain axe idling with a hungry, chugging growl. The red eye lenses of its helmet bored into him. Kaelin, he didn't struggle, didn't beg. He just stared back. I am not your enemy. The berserker that held him, its own helmet a snarling brass skull, laughed. The sound was a metallic bark filtered through a vox grill thick with spittle. Berserker 1, his voice a static-laden roar. All are our enemies, the weak, the strong, all blood is for the throne. Kaelin's ruined entrenching tool was still strapped to his pack, a pathetic broken toy. His pipe was long gone. He was unarmed, wounded, and cornered by two demigods of slaughter. The old Kaelin would have recited the litany of detestation, and died. The new Kaelin did something else. He slowly, deliberately raised his empty hands, showing his palms. Then he unclipped the broken entrenching tool and let it fall to the ground with a clatter. Kaelin, his voice was low, raw, and utterly certain. You are strong. I am strong. Your weak prey is not worthy of my blade. I am here to join. This gave the berserkers pause. The one with the chain axe tilted its head, its weapon's growl softening for a bare second. It was an unexpected response. They were used to please curses or futile resistance, not application. Berserker 2, join a corpse-worshipping guardsman. You seek to join the Eaters of Worlds. Kaelin, I worship nothing. The corpse god abandoned this world. He abandoned me. I saw only the truth. Berserker 1, he snorted, but his grip loosened slightly. And what truth is that, little man? Kaelin, he met the red lenses without flinching. That discipline is a lie. That faith is a shield for cowards. That only strength matters, and that all that is left is the kill. There was a long silence, broken only by the distant screams of the dying Valhallans and the roar of chain weapons. The first berserker shoved Kaelin away, sending him stumbling to his knees. Berserker 1, Garkle. This one, it stinks of rage. It amuses me. Let us take it to the champion. The other Garkle grunted in agreement. They grabbed Kaelin by the arms, his boots dragging through the rubble, and hauled him into the center of the plaza. The slaughter was over. The berserkers were standing in a lake of gore, their armor glistening. On a throne of piled corpses and shattered tank plating sat their leader. He was an aspiring champion, a monster of a man named Vorlag the Flayer. His armor was more ornate, brass-trimmed, and hung with still bleeding trophies. His bare-headed, scarred face was a mask of aristocratic contempt. He was cleaning his massive twin-headed chain axe with a rag that might have once been an imperial banner. He did not look up as Kaelin was thrown at his feet. Vorlag. His voice was a cultured, sneering baritone, not the roar of his men. More meat, Garkul. I told you to stop bringing me broken toys. Just kill it. Berserker 1. He nudged Kaelin's side with a steel-toed boot. It spoke Lord Vorlag. It claims it wishes to join. It says, "It has seen the truth." Vorlag finally looked up. His eyes were a pale, piercing ice blue, utterly devoid of any emotion save a cold, bored cruelty. He studied Kalen for a long moment, taking in the Cadian fatigues, the emaciated frame, the festering wound, the defiant, burning eyes. Vorlag Acadian. The Emperor's little toy soldiers. Broken, I see. What truth has a broken toy learned? Kalen, he pushed himself up to one knee, a gesture of defiance, not supplication. That the Emperor is a lie. That this, he gestured to the surrounding carnage, Kalen, is the only thing that is real. I am not a toy. I am a weapon, and I wish to be pointed at something that matters. Vorlag smiled. It was a terrible, thin-lipped expression. Vorlag a weapon. You are a worm. You have no armor. You have no axe. You have nothing but the stink of desperation. But the fire in your eyes, it is amusing. Very well, weapon. We are in need of sport. We will give you a chance to prove this new convenient faith. He pointed his axe towards a gaping hole in the plaza, the exposed entrance to a sewage processing cistern. Vorlag in there. We keep our pets. We grow them on the flesh of the weak. Kill what you find, and you may have the honor of dying in my service. Fail, and you will simply be food. The berserkers roared with laughter, forming a crude ring around the cistern's entrance. They shoved Kalen forward. Kalen, he looked back at Vorlag, his face a mask of cold fury. And my weapon. Vorlag laughed again, a sharp barking sound. Vorlag the blood god provides, now go. Kalen was kicked from behind, tumbling down a slick metal ramp into the darkness. He landed hard, skidding on a floor covered in filth and bone fragments. The stench was overwhelming, a charnel house miasma of rot and mutation. The vast chamber was lit only by a faint, sickly green phosphorescence from the slime-coated walls. He heard it before he saw it. A wet, slavering sound, the scraping of too many limbs on metal. From the deepest shadows, a thing of nightmare unfolded itself. It was a chaos spawn, a roiling mass of tumorous flesh, fused limbs, and snapping maws, the final pathetic fate of a weak-willed psyker. It was easily the size of a Lehman Russ tank, all blubber pseudopods and blind, screaming faces. It sensed him and bellowed a sound of pure, mindless agony. Kalen's back was to the ramp. The berserkers were up there, silhouetted against the red sky, their laughter echoing down. He had no gun, no knife, no shovel. He had only his hands, his Cadian-trained mind, and the burning primal rage that was now his only god. The spawn lunged a wave of mismatched limbs and tentacles. Kalen's mind went cold and sharp. The rage was there, a furnace in his core, but his training, his 30 years of drilled instinctive reflexes, took the wheel. Analyze, adapt, overcome. He didn't run. He dodged, inside the attack. He slipped under a swinging club-like arm, the wind of it tearing at his clothes. The spawn was fast for its size, but it was stupid. It was all aggression, no control. He scrambled over a pile of filth, putting it between him and the beast. The creature roared in frustration and smashed the pile, showering him with gore. Kalen to himself, a breathless growl. Slow, predictable, it leads with its largest limb. The beast charged again. Kalen stood his ground. At the last second, he grabbed a large, jagged shard of bone from the floor, the femur of some massive creature, and jammed it point first into the sludge. As the creature lunged, he dropped and rolled. The spawn, in its blind haste, impaled its own foremost tentacle on the makeshift spike. It screamed a sound that rattled Kalen's teeth and reared back, thrashing. Now! This was the Cadian way: create an opening, then exploit it with maximum prejudice. Kalen didn't hesitate. As the beast was distracted by its own pain, he ran at it, leaping onto its thrashing, slime-covered back. He was a flea on a monster. He clawed his way up the heaving, tumorous flesh, seeking a target. He saw it, a cluster of weeping, sightless eyes, near what passed for its head, a vulnerable, unarmored patch of pulsing brain tissue. He had no weapon. He used what he had. He jammed his gauntleted thumbs into the two largest, softest eyes and pushed. He put his entire weight, his entire hatred, every ounce of his rage into that single, brutal act. The spawn's scream went supersonic. It thrashed, trying to dislodge him, smashing its own body against the cistern walls, but Kalen held on, his thumbs buried to the knuckles grinding. He was bellowing his own voice, a wordless chorus of pure, murderous exertion. He felt the soft tissue rupture, the cranial sac pop under the pressure. A geyser of foul psychic ichor erupted, drenching him. The beast shuddered. It spasmed violently, its limbs curling inward, and then with a great wet sigh, it collapsed, a mountain of dead, twitching meat. Kalen stood on the corpse, covered in blood and filth, his chest heaving. He was alive. He had won. He threw back his head, and from his throat a sound ripped free. It was not a Cadian cry of victory. It was not a human shout. It was a long, triumphant, bestial roar. He turned to the ramp. The berserkers were silent. Their laughter was gone. He climbed his boots, slipping in the gore, and emerged into the red daylight. He stood before Vorlag, his knuckles bloody, his eyes blazing with the kill. Vorlag the Flayer stared at him, the smile gone from his face. He saw the Cadian sergeant, but he saw the beast within. He nodded slowly, a single gesture of acknowledgement. Vorlag the Blood God provides indeed key examples of Kalen's Cadian skill precision analysis with his new rage, brutality, strength. The warband roars back in approval. Kalen is cornered by Connaught berserkers. He doesn't fight, he asks to join. The aspiring champion mocks him. The test fight a chaos spawn unarmed in a pit. Kalen uses his Cadian training, dodging, analyzing weaknesses, combined with his new brutal rage, using his bare hands, a sharp rock, to tear the beast apart. He roars and the warband roars back. I will write these 3 scenes as a continuous script. I need to capture the shift from a lone, rage-filled survivor to someone seeking to join a group. The berserkers should be terrifying, a wall of brass and red. The aspiring champion needs to be arrogant but perceptive. The fight with the chaos spawn must be visceral, contrasting Kalen's old, disciplined Cadian techniques with his new, brutal rage. His lack of a real weapon entrenching tool is gone is important. He is cornered because he is effectively unarmed, which makes his request to join more impactful. Self-correction. The prompt says unarmed for the fight. I'll make sure he uses only his environment and his hands, no weapons at all. Correction. The prompt for C3 said he dropped his shovel. The prompt for C4 says he throws down his weapon. I'll assume he's found another crude weapon like the pipe from C2, or maybe just his combat knife. Let's stick with the entrenching tool he dropped in C3. No, wait, the prompt for C4 says he's cornered. Okay, let's say he is cornered, and his only weapon is the broken entrenching tool from C3, which is pathetic. That makes his action of throwing it down more symbolic. Okay, let's refine the plan. Encounter Kalen is drawn to the sound of battle. He finds the berserkers. He is spotted. He is cornered. His only weapon is his broken shovel. Request the berserkers surround him, ready for the kill. He looks at them, then at his broken tool, a symbol of his old failed life. He throws it down. I am not your enemy. I am here to join. Trial Vorlag the champion mocks him, a Cadian worm, but he sees the hate in Kalen's eyes. He orders the trial. Pit Kalen is kicked into a pit with a chaos spawn. He is totally unarmed. Fight Kalen uses Cadian agility to dodge. He analyzes the spawn. It's all just rage. He sees a weakness, an unhealed wound, or a vulnerable spot. Victory. He uses his environment, a sharp rock, a piece of rebar, and his bare hands fueled by his own rage to kill it. He tears it apart, not just kills it. Approval. He climbs out covered in gore and roars. The warband, impressed by the savagery, roars back. This fits the 10K character count. Konjuong Nhuom. Mao Act 2, The Blood-Soaked Bath. Chuong 5 Lua, The Tam Lan. Chapter 5, The Eightfold Oath. Jodai Muktieu Ot Bihant Ki Tu. Kaelin's victory in the pit earned him a name. The berserkers, their voices like grinding rocks, no longer called him Worm or Cadian. They called him Spawnbreaker. He had earned his keep with blood, the only currency this new world respected. But he was not yet one of them. He was a curio and amusingly savage pet. To be truly accepted, he had to be broken down and remade in the image of his new demanding god, Vorlag the Flayer. His cold ice-blue eyes, showing a flicker of genuine interest for the first time, summoned him from the pit. Kaelin, still dripping with the spawn's acidic ichor, was dragged before the champion. Vorlag, you fight with the rage of a true killer, Cadian, but you are still filthy. You stink of your old life. You stink of the corpse god's lies. Kaelin said nothing. He just stared, his chest heaving, the blood hunger from the fight still thrumming in his veins. Vorlag the Blood. God does not accept weakness. He does not accept divided loyalties. To walk our path, you must burn your old one. You must cast off the rotting corpse of your past. Do you understand? Kaelin, his voice was a low growl. I understand. Vorlag, good. Then your baptism will begin. He was hauled to the center of the plaza where the warband had erected a crude, towering effigy. It was built from the wreckage of a Lehman Russ tank, its turret jammed upside down, its cannon pointing to the earth. The entire structure was draped in banners torn from the Valhallan dead and painted with the 8-pointed star in thick, wet blood. This was their altar. Vorlag stood before him, holding a piece of jagged, glowing metal heated in the flames of a burning chimera. It was shaped into a crude 8-pointed star. Vorlag, you came to us as a soldier. You will be reborn as a warrior. You had a name given to you by weakling parents who died in a weakling's world. What is your name, Cadian? Kaelin, he hesitated for only a second, the memory of his name. A cold, distant stone. Kaelin. Vorlag, he sneered Kaelin. A soft name. A name that begs for orders. That name dies now. You are no one. You are a vessel for the Red God's fury. When you have earned a true name, he will grant it. Until then, you are simply the aspirant. Vorlag gestured. 2 berserkers seized Kaelin, ripping his tattered Cadian fatigues from his torso, exposing his chest. The skin was a map of old scars from a life of duty. Vorlag, now you will swear the 8-fold oath. You will renounce the lies that bound you, and you will embrace the truths that will set you free. He raised the glowing brand. Vorlag, his voice a booming ritualistic chant. One, renounce the corpse god whose throne is built on the lie of hope. He slammed the red-hot metal onto Kaelin's right pectoral. Kaelin roared as his flesh seared, the smell of his own burning skin filling his nostrils. But he did not pull away. He leaned into the pain. Kaelin, through clenched teeth, a scream of affirmation. I renounce him. Vorlag, too, renounce duty, the chain of the weak-willed. He pressed the brand again, lower. Another scream. Kaelin, I renounce it. Vorlag 3, renounce mercy, the shield of the coward. 4, renounce peace, the dream of the cattle. 5, renounce order, the cage of the slave. 6, renounce comradeship, the crutch of the frail. 7, renounce reason, the blindness of the fool. With each declaration, the brand fell. Kaelin's chest was a ruin of blackened, weeping flesh. The pain was an ocean, a universe of agony that should have rendered him unconscious. But it didn't. It focused him. It burned away the last vestiges of the man he had been. Every scream tore another piece of Sergeant Kaelin from his soul. Vorlag paused, the brand smoking. Kaelin was on his knees, trembling, his head bowed, blood and sweat dripping from his face. Vorlag and 8. He grabbed Kaelin by the hair, yanking his head back, forcing their eyes to meet. Vorlag, renounce hope, the final lie. Swear your life, your blood, and your very soul, not to a promise of salvation, but to the certainty of the slaughter. Swear yourself to Khorne. He pressed the very center of the brand, the junction of the 8 points directly over Kaelin's heart. This time Kaelin did not scream. He bellowed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated release, a final, violent exorcism. He stared into Vorlag's icy eyes as his heart was seared, and he saw nothing but the red, burning truth. "Kalen, I swear blood for the blood god." He roared the last words, the blasphemous creed tearing from his raw throat. As he finished, the world swam. A wave of power, cold and hot, flooded his system. The wounds on his chest, they were not healing. The pain did not subside. Instead, the blackened, self-inflicted sigil of the 8-pointed star began to glow. Not with heat, but with a faint, pulsing, angry red light, like embers fanned by a dark wind. He felt power. Raw, untamed energy surged through his limbs. The agony in his leg vanished, replaced by a thrumming strength. His hunger was gone, his exhaustion evaporated. He was filled to the brim with a restless, violent energy. He had been emptied, and now he had been refilled. He staggered to his feet, his chest a burning constellation of his new faith. The berserkers who had been watching in silence raised their axes. They did not cheer. They slammed the butts of their weapons onto the ferrocrete in a rhythmic, booming salute. Thud. 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 It was the sound of the pulse in his head, the sound of the blood god's heart made real. He was one of them. The baptism was complete. The gifts of the blood god were not without their price. The power that surged in Kalen's veins, the fire that burned away his pain and weakness, demanded fuel. His new life in Vorlag's warband was a brutal, simple cycle. They moved, they slaughtered, they offered the skulls, and they moved again. There was no strategy, no grand design. There was only the hunt. In the rare moments of quiet, the hours spent huddled in the bowels of a wrecked gargant, the red sky obscured by tons of metal as the warband waited for a rival orc clan to pass. The changes in Kalen's mind became apparent. He was sitting apart from the others, running a whetstone over the edge of a massive notched cleaver he had taken from a fallen Valhallan Ogrin. The sound was a rhythmic shing, shing, shing. A face flickered behind his eyes. A young man, pale, trembling in a trench. He had a name. Varus. Kalen stopped sharpening. He frowned, trying to hold the image. He remembered the name. He remembered the sound the man had made as the marauders took him. A high-pitched, wet scream. He remembered the smell of his own helpless rage, the taste of concrete dust and blood. But the face... What color were his eyes? Did he have a scar on his jaw, or was that Korvax? He tried to picture his squad, the Vindicators lined up for inspection in the Casa Krell barracks. He could see the line of khaki uniforms. He could see the gleam of their lasgun barrels. He could not see a single face. They were blank, hazy ovals, like portraits scrubbed clean. He tried harder, a flicker of something. Not rage. Something like panic. Stirring in his chest. I commanded them. I knew them. I bled with them. The harder he tried, the more the memories dissolved, turning to grey smoke. The names were just sounds. The faces were gone. His 30 years of service, his loyalty, his brotherhood, it had all been hollowed out, leaving only a shell. But the other memories, those were sharp. The memory of the marauder's laughter. The memory of the Valhallan's skull cracking under the pipe. The feeling of his thumbs sinking into the spawn's brain. The hot arterial spray from the Ogrin's neck as he'd taken this cleaver. Those memories were in high definition, vibrant and real. He looked down at the 8-pointed brand on his chest, which pulsed with a dim, steady light like a heart beneath his skin. The faint flicker of panic was gone, burned away by a familiar, dull throb of anger. The past didn't matter. The dead were just the dead. Only the act of killing had meaning. He resumed sharpening his blade, the shing, 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 faster now, more aggressive. The faces were gone, and he found he did not care. But the quiet created other problems. The thrumming energy, the pulse in his head did not sleep. When the warband was not actively engaged in slaughter, the energy turned inward. It began to hurt. He could not sit still. The camp in the Gargant's wreckage was a hive of activity. Berserkers brawled in fighting pits, Warpsmiths hammered on broken armor, slaves wailed as they were butchered for sport. But Kalen was separate, pacing the perimeter like a caged wolf. The itch was back, but it was no longer a simple urge. It was a physical, clawing need. His skin crawled as if insects were burrowing beneath it. His muscles, infused with warp-spawned strength, ached with inaction, spasming and cramping. The brand on his chest was a hot, tight knot of pain. He felt like a boiler about to explode. The stillness was a physical torment, a grinding, agonizing pressure building behind his eyes. He needed to hit something. He needed to break something. He needed to make something bleed. The withdrawal was an agony far worse than any wound he had ever taken. He was a creature designed for one purpose, and in these moments of rest he was failing it. He was a living weapon, and his safety was on. It was intolerable. He slammed his gauntleted fist into a bulkhead, the metal groaning and buckling. The jolt of the impact, the sharp pain that lanced up his arm brought a momentary exquisite relief. It was a single drop of water on a raging fire. He hit it again. And again. Thud. 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 If you break your hand, aspirant, you will be useless. Kalen spun his cleaver in his hand, his teeth bared in a snarl. It was Garkle the berserker who had first captured him. He was sitting on a pile of shells, idly polishing a skull-shaped helmet. Kyle Garkle. He didn't even look up. You have the nails in your head, Cadian, but you have no iron. They are in your soul. Kalen, his voice a low, strangled rasp. I need to fight, Garkle. He chuckled a sound like gravel in a grinder. We all need to fight. But the champion says we wait. The orcs are too many, so we wait. Learn to control the thirst, or it will drown you. Garkle began to whistle. It was not a tune. It was a single high-pitched wheezing note, in and out, in and out. A sound of pure, grating boredom. To Kalen's raw, overcharged senses, the sound was a physical spike being driven into his ear. It was the scrape of a fingernail on his brain. The pressure behind his eyes became a blinding migraine. Kalen, stop it. Garkle. The whistling continued, mocking. Stop what, little man? Kalen, he took a step, his cleaver tightening in his grip. That sound. It's weak. Stop. Garkle finally stood up, his full, power-armored height towering over Kalen. He was a veteran of the Long War, and this Cadian-born whelp, this aspirant, was daring to give him an order. Garkle, you are brave, Spawnbreaker, or just stupid. You still smell of the corpse mud you were born in. I will not be commanded by. Kalen did not wait for the sentence to finish. The insult, the noise, the agonizing itch, it all converged into a single explosive point. He didn't issue a challenge. He didn't think. He acted. He bellowed a wordless sound of pure animal rage and lunged. He was fast. His new strength was terrifying. He slammed into Garkle, his smaller, unarmored form moving with the force of a battering ram. The berserker, caught by surprise, stumbled back. Kalen was a blur of motion, his cleaver swinging not with a warrior's skill, but with a butcher's frantic energy. He hacked at Garkle's chest plate, the blows clanging like hammers, sparks flying. Garkle roared more in outrage than pain, and backhanded Kalen, sending him skidding across the metal deck. But Kalen was up in an instant, his eyes rolled back, foam and blood flecking his lips. He was feral. He charged again. This time Garkle was ready. He drew his massive, roaring chain axe and met the charge. The cleaver and the axe locked in a shower of sparks, the two warriors locked in a pushing match. Garkle, his voice vox, spitting with rage. I will take your skull for this arrogance. Kalen, he was screaming, his face a mask of madness. Blood, blood, blood. He was strong, but Garkle was stronger and encased in ceramite. The berserker shoved Kalen back, raised his axe for a killing blow. Enough! The single word cut through the red haze. It was Vorlag. The champion stood on a higher gantry, his twin-headed axe resting on his shoulder. He did not look angry. He looked disappointed. The two fighters froze, their weapons still raised, their chests heaving. Kalen's rage was still screaming, but the ingrained Cadian discipline twisted into this new form, recognized the voice of command. Vorlag. His voice was cold, carrying easily over the din gargle. You are a veteran. You should know better than to waste your strength on a rabid pup. His icy gaze shifted to Kalen. Kalen was still trembling, the cleaver shaking in his hand, the need to kill still unfulfilled. Vorlag aspirant, your rage is a holy gift. It is the very breath of Khorne. It is not yours to waste on a brother-in-arms over a petty squabble. It is meant for his enemies. It is meant for the skulls of the worthy. You spill our own blood here in the dark. You are not a warrior. You are just an animal. And I have no use for animals. I cannot point. Kalen's breath was a ragged sob, the red mist slowly receding, leaving the agonizing, unscratched itch behind. He was humiliated, but he understood. Vorlag, that rage, it is a weapon. My weapon to be used by my hand in the service of the blood god. You will hold it. You will contain it. And when I give the word, you will unleash it upon the orcs. And only then. Do you understand me? Kalen, he spat a gob of bloody saliva onto the deck. His voice was a strained whisper. I understand. Vorlag, good. Because if you ever raise your blade to one of my warband again without my leave, I will personally flay you and use your skin as a banner. Now, meditate on your failure. Vorlag turned and walked away. Gargle gave Kalen one last look of utter contempt, then deactivated his axe and stomped off. Kalen was left alone, shaking his hand, bleeding the pressure in his head worse than before. He had learned a new, terrible discipline. The rage was not a release. It was a tool. It had to be honed, aimed, and used only for a purpose. It was the discipline of the slaughter, and the waiting the containment. That was the truest agony of all. The orcs had been a green tide, a glorious, mindless wave of violence that Kalen had thrown himself into with joyous abandon. His cleaver had risen and fallen a metronome of slaughter until his arms were numb and his body was painted in a thick, black-green lacquer of Xeno's blood. He had fought until the orcs broke, and then he had hunted the stragglers, his roar of triumph echoing Garkles. He had taken a dozen skulls, piling them high at the base of Vorlag's command standard. He had finally scratched the itch. His reward was to be unmade. Vorlag, standing over Kylan's pyramid of skulls, had nodded once. Vorlag the pup has teeth, but his skin is weak. He has earned iron. Take him to the forge. Before Kalen could react, two berserkers grabbed him. They dragged him to the forge, a hellish mobile workshop set up in the irradiated bowels of a downed Imperial lander. The air stank of molten metal ozone, and something else, the faint psychic stink of tortured machine spirits. Here the warband's warpsmith, being known only as the Iron Gorger, practiced his art. He was a grotesque parody of a tech priest, his flesh fused with smoking pipes, pistons, and a writhing nest of mechadendrites. The berserkers held Kalen down on a slab of metal still stained with the blood of its last occupant. Kalen, he did not struggle, but his eyes were wary. What? Is this? Vorlag, he entered the forge, his voice casual. Your flak armor. It is an insult. It is the shell of an insect, a reminder of a life of cowardice and failure. You have proven yourself worthy of something more. At Vorlag's signal, the berserkers did not unbuckle Kalen's Cadian pattern armor. They tore it from his body. Knives flashed cutting straps. Gauntleted hands ripped plates free, tearing away chunks of scabbed-over skin and dried blood. The breastplate, which he had polished every day for 30 years, was rent in two and cast aside. His boots, his greaves, his pauldrons, all of it, his last physical connection to Cadia, was stripped from him in a brutal, painful, and humiliating act of cleansing. He was left naked save for his torn trousers shivering on the cold slab, the glowing red brand on his chest pulsing in the gloom. The Iron Gorger's mechadendrites whirred, lifting a massive shape from the shadows. It was a suit of power armor, Mark VII the Aquila pattern, but it had been violated. Its Imperial Aquila had been defaced, smashed, and gouged by hammers. Its surface was scarred by millennia of battle, painted a deep flat red and adorned with crude brass sigils of the blood god. It was a sarcophagus of a dead hero now given to a new, monstrous purpose. Kalen, he stared at the suit, a flicker of his old self rising in awe and horror. Astarte. Vorlag, he laughed. It was Astartes. It belonged to a loyalist dog of the Emperor, a crimson fist, I believe. He was very loud when he died. Now it is yours, a gift. Kalen wasn't invited into the suite. He was installed. The Iron Gorger, with the cold, impersonal precision of a slaughterhouse servitor, began the process. Kalen was hauled to his feet and forced backward into the open chassis. The chest plate was slammed shut, the clasps locking with the finality of a tomb. The weight was immediate crushing. He would have collapsed if the forge's gantry claw wasn't holding him upright. Then the rebirth began. It was an agony that dwarfed the eightfold branding. The Iron Gorger's mechadendrites tipped with white-hot rivets and whirring drills descended. This was not a fitting. It was an impaling. Kalen, his voice was a choked gasp. Wait! The warpsmith did not wait. He began to bolt the armor directly to Kalen's body. Rivets glowing with demonic heat were hammered through the inner plasteel and into Kalen's bones, his clavicles, his ribs, his femurs to secure the heavy plates. Kalen screamed, a high-pitched tearing sound that was lost in the forge's roar. But the worst was the neural interface. The Iron Gorger took thick black cables tipped with barbed coppery spikes from the armor's own spine. Iron Gorger, his voice was a synthesized buzz like a billion trapped flies. Hold. Still. Meet. The blessing. Must. Connect. With a series of brutal rhythmic punches, the mechadendrites hammered the spikes into Kalen's flesh, into the base of his skull, into his spine, into the major nerve clusters of his arms and legs. Kalen's body arched, every muscle locking in a solid, agonizing spasm. His vision went white. He felt a cold, alien consciousness, the armor's broken, howling machine spirit slam into his own mind, a torrent of hatred and pain. Dark, whispered litanies in a language of static and screams were chanted by the warpsmith, sealing the bond not just with technology, but with blood and profane ritual. The gantry claw released him. Kalen collapsed to his knees, his new body a universe of torment. He was a prisoner in 10,000 pounds of unholy iron. Vorlag, stand up, aspirant. Kalen tried. His limbs felt like lead. He was piloting a corpse. Vorlag, I said stand. Kalen roared a sound of defiance and agony. He pushed. The armor's fiber bundles, caked in old blood, resisted. Vorlag, you are a worm in a god's skin. You are weak. You are nothing. The orcs should have killed you. The insults, the old familiar sting of failure, of helplessness. It fanned the embers of Kalen's rage. The itch returned, the throb in his head, the need to break the thing that was mocking him. His face streaked with tears of pure pain, contorted into a snarl. Kalen, grr! And the armor answered. As his anger flared, the neural interface flared with it. He felt a jolt of raw, intoxicating power. The dormant systems roared to life. The suit's internal reactor, which had been at a low thrum, surged the sound a deep mechanical growl. The world, which had been muffled, suddenly snapped into sharp focus, a dozen new sensory inputs flooding his brain. Atmospheric pressure motion trackers, a targeting reticle in his right eye he couldn't turn off. He stood. He was no longer a man. He was a giant. He looked down at his new hand's massive red gauntlets. He clenched his fist. The sound was not of flesh, but of grinding gears and hissing pistons. The strength in it was immense. He felt the rage building the familiar pressure. But now it had an outlet. As his fury mounted the armor's vents on its back, and shoulders suddenly hissed open, releasing plumes of oily, superheated steam. The mechanical growl of the power pack deepened, a hungry metallic purr that vibrated through his very bones. He was in perfect, terrible symbiosis. The armor fed on his rage. and his rage in turn was amplified by the armor's power. He was no longer just a man feeling anger. He was the anger encased in iron, a walking, breathing, snarling engine of war. He turned his head to Vorlag, and the armor's servos whined in perfect, menacing synchronization. Kalen stood in his new skin of iron, a red giant. The forge's oppressive heat was nothing cooled by the suit's internal systems, which seemed to run on his own simmering fury. He felt the power, but his hands felt wrong. He was still clutching the Ogrin's cleaver, the massive weapon that had served him so well. Now in his power-armored gauntlet, it looked like a child's toy, a crude, clumsy piece of scrap. Vorlag's icy eyes fell upon it. He sneered a look of profound, aristocratic disdain. Vorlag, a tool. You killed the orcs with a tool, like a farmer gutting a grox. It is inefficient. It is clumsy. It has no voice. It is the weapon of a butcher, not a warrior. Before Kalen could react, Vorlag moved. He was a blur of red and brass. His massive twin-headed axe Gorefather swung in a precise, contemptuous arc. The demon weapon didn't just hit the cleaver, it disintegrated it. The crude metal blade shattered into a dozen pieces, the haft flying from Kalen's hand, his fingers stinging from the impact. Kalen stared at his empty, massive gauntlet. The last weapon of his old life, the symbol of his survival, was gone. He felt a flash of naked, possessive anger, and the armor hissed steam in response. Vorlag, he rested his axe on his shoulder, its teeth idling with a hungry, wet chug. The blood god does not arm his chosen with trash. You have been baptized in iron. Now you will be armed in wrath. Come. Vorlag turned and strode from the forge, his heavy boots clanging on the deck. Kalen followed his own new footfalls, a matching, thunderous echo. He was no longer a man walking. He was a fortress moving. They were led to the warband's sanctum, a vast, open cargo bay that served as their temple and armory. The place was a monument to the kill. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with skulls, orc, human, and stranger things Kalen did not recognize. And in the center, not on racks, but in a single, glorious 20-foot-high mound, were the weapons. It was a mountain of captured steel. Thousands of weapons taken only from champions the warband had slain were piled here as a testament to their prowess and an offering to Khorne. Chainsword's power fists, thunder hammers, gleaming power axes, and brutal rusted blades Kalen couldn't name. It was a king's ransom in war gear. Vorlag, he gestured to the pile with his axe. This is the armory of the god. These are the voices of the worthy dead. We do not issue weapons, aspirant. We do not hand a warrior his blade like a tithe to a beggar. You take what you are strong enough to claim. The blade chooses the hand chooses the blood. Now choose. Kalen stepped forward, his new senses on high alert. He could feel the pile. It was not just metal, it was a nexus of violent histories. Each weapon hummed with the echoes of the slaughters it had committed. A shimmering power sword, still crackling with a blue halo, seemed to sing a song of elder grief. A massive iron-bound thunderhammer pulsed with the sullen, disciplined rage of a fallen salamander. He was drawn his feet, moving on their own. Not to the bright, clean Astartes crafted weapons, not to the elegant alien blades. His gaze was fixed on a weapon buried deep in the pile, only its haft and part of the head visible. It was a chain axe. Not the ornate twin-headed weapon Vorlag carried, but a massive single-bladed implement of brutal functionality. Its casing was a dull, dark brass, stained black with old blood. Its teeth were not the standard chain links, but thick, serrated fangs like the jawbone of some great predator. The weapon was silent. It was not chugging. It was not crackling with energy. It was dormant, and it was humming. He felt it in his bones, a low, subsonic thrum that matched the thump-thump-thump in his own head. It was a frequency he recognized. It was the beat of the pulse that had guided him since the Valhallan's death. It was the sound of his own rage given form in metal. Kalen, he pointed his voice a mechanical rasp from his helmet's Vox grill. That Vorlag's eyebrow raised. The old hunger, a bold choice. Many have tried to claim it. It has found them all lacking. Take it if you can. Kalen climbed the mound of weapons, his power-armored boots finding purchase on sword hilts and axe heads. He reached the axe. It was half buried under the corpse of a power-fisted Terminator. He shoved the dead Astartes aside with a grunt, the body tumbling down the pile. He wrapped his red gauntlet around the axe's grip. The moment his fingers touched the worn leather, it happened. The universe screamed. A wave of pure, undiluted, starving rage slammed into his mind, a psychic backlash that made the armor's neural implantation feel like a gentle kiss. It was not a thought. It was not a voice. It was a single overwhelming primal concept: hunger. The axe roared to life. Not with the chug-chug-chug of a normal chain weapon, but a deep, guttural, lion-like roar. The black teeth spun into a blur, glowing with a faint, sickly red light. The dormant machine woke, and in his head Kalen heard it. A low, growling, sibilant whisper, a sound of pure, demonic delight. Feed me. It was a demon, a being of pure, mindless hunger bound within the adamantium casing of the axe. It had been sleeping, starving, waiting. And in Kalen, in his bottomless well of rage, and his new augmented body, it recognized a kindred spirit. It recognized a master who could finally provide the feast it craved. Kalen roared back, his own voice amplified by the vox, blending with the axe's cry. The sheer weight of the weapon was immense enough to buckle a normal man, but in his new power-armored grip, it felt light. It felt balanced. It felt like a missing part of his own arm. He stood on the peak of the weapon mound, a red giant in a storm of skulls, and raised his new weapon to the sky. The axe howled a promise of the slaughter to come. It was hungry. He was hungry. They would feast together. Outpost X-19 was a ghost from Kalen's former life. It was a standard Imperial prefab bunker system surrounded by hastily constructed bastions of plasteel and sandbags. Green lasfire, disciplined and precise, stitched the air. The Aquila flew high over the command bunker, tattered but defiant. It was a sight Kalen had seen defended and bled for 1,000 times. Now it just made him sick. It was a monument to a lie. He stood at the front of the warband, a crimson and brass giant, his new chain-axe old hunger thrumming in his grip. The demon within was awake, and starving, its low growl, a vibration he felt in his spine. The itch was a raging fire in his skull. Vorlag the Flayer stood beside him, pointing with Gorefather. Vorlag that. It offends me. It stinks of order and false hope. Erase it. That was the entirety of the plan. The Kalen of Cadia would have spent an hour analyzing the position. He would have identified the heavy bolter nest at the north bastion, the clear fields of fire at the main gate, the probable mortar position behind the command bunker. He would have formulated a plan of flanking maneuvers suppressing fire and coordinated assault. The Kalen of Khorne did not. He looked at the outpost. He saw the weak points not with a tactician's eye, but with a predator's. He saw the gaps between the bursts of lasfire. He saw the men behind the guns' soft meat in fragile armor. The daemon axe in his hand leapt in his grip, its hunger pulse a jarring physical demand. Feed us. Kalen didn't wait for an order. He didn't wait for the rest of the warband. He lowered his horned helmet, and with a single deafening roar that tore through his vox grill, he charged. Kalen First Blood is mine. He ran. He was not a soldier advancing, he was an avalanche. His power-armored boots cracked the ferrocrete as he built momentum, a 10,000-pound engine of hate, moving at the speed of a sprinting man. Contact someone shrieked from the bastion. Astartes Chaos, Astartes open fire. A storm of green lasfire converged on him. The beams which would have punched through his old flak armor splashed against his new unholy plate. They were mosquito bites. They were annoying. The impacts were tiny, rattling pings against the thunder of his own footsteps and the howling of his axe. A heavy bolter round struck him square in the chest, the explosive shell detonating with a crack. The force staggered him, but the ceramite held. It didn't pierce. It just made him angrier. Kalen roaring into the hail of fire weak. He reached the first barricade, a 4-meter wall of plasteel and rock. He didn't climb it, he didn't vault it, he simply hit it. His shoulder backed by his full charging weight, and the suit's enraged servos struck the wall like a cannonball. The entire structure exploded, sending sandbags, men, and metal flying. He was in. The Cadian defenders, their faces white with terror, were too slow. They were trained for men, not for a demigod of slaughter. Kalen's axe was a red blur. He swung it in a great horizontal arc. Old Hunger screamed as its fangs bit into flesh and flak armor, shearing 3 men in half with a single joyous howl. The spray of hot arterial blood on his armor felt like a benediction. He was a whirlwind. He was no longer thinking. He was acting. He was pure instinctual violence. His axe was his mind. Kill, maim, feed. He grabbed a trooper by the throat with his free hand, his massive gauntlet crushing the man's larynx, and threw the body into the heavy bolter nest, silencing it. He spun his axe, eviscerating another defender, then hissed as a chainsword bit into his back. The teeth scraped on his power pack, unable to find purchase. Kalen turned slowly. His opponent was young, terribly young. He wore the red sash of a Cadian sergeant, his face streaked with dirt, but set in a mask of rigid, righteous fury. His chin was clean-shaven. His eyes were iron grey. It was him. It was Sergeant Kalen, 30 years younger, a ghost of the man who had died in the rubble. Young Sergeant. His voice was tight, trembling, but full of Cadian steel. Traitor by the throne, how you wear the colors of the 88th. What are you? Kalen tilted his head, his helmet servos whining. The demon axe in his hand growled, impatient for this new, defiant meat. The word Cadia felt hollow, a sound from a dead language. Young Sergeant, he raised his chainsword, the standard-issue weapon, buzzing angrily. Listen to me. I don't know what they did to you, what lies they fed you, but there is always redemption. The Emperor protects. Lay down your arms, brother. Your soul can still be the word. Salvation, hope, lies. The lies that had left Varys to be torn apart. The lies that had left him helpless in the dark. The lies that had been burned from his chest with hot iron. This thing, this child dared to speak the words of the weak. He was not a mirror of Kalen's past. He was the disease Kalen had cut from his own heart. He was weakness given form, and he had to be erased. Kalen laughed. The sound that came from his vox grill was a harsh, metallic, inhuman bark. Kalen Vox Redemption. The Emperor protects nothing. The young sergeant's face hardened. The time for words was over. He saw the monster, and his duty was clear. Young sergeant, then die. Abomination for Cadia for the Emperor. He charged, his chainsword held high for a righteous blow. Kalen stood his ground, a crimson mountain. He watched the pathetic, buzzing blade descend. He did not block. He did not parry. He let his own rage, his true god, answer. He brought Old Hunger up in a devastating, rising uppercut, his entire body, his armor, and his fury behind it. He roared his new, true litany, his voice drowning out the sergeants. Kalen Vox, blood for the blood, God skulls for the skull throne. The two weapons met. It was not a contest. The demon axe, howling with warp hunger, devoured the Cadian's chainsword. The teeth of Old Hunger shattered the sergeant's blade, sending fragments of metal flying. The axe did not slow. It struck the young sergeant just under the jaw, its momentum carrying it up through his helmet, splitting his skull and erupting from the top of his head in a geyser of blood, bone, and brains. Kalen held him there for a second, the corpse impaled on the axe, his own faceplate just inches from the dead man's. He stared into the eyes of his own past, now vacant and lifeless. With a grunt of disgust, he ripped the axe free, bisecting the body. The two halves of the young sergeant, the last remnants of Sergeant Kalen, fell to the deck with a wet thud. The demon axe purred a deep, sated, orgasmic sound that vibrated up Kalen's arm. He turned. The rest of the warband was pouring through the breach he had made. The battle was already over. It was just a massacre now. Kalen raised his dripping axe to the sky, and roared his voice a promise of the new red world to come. The point of no return had not just been crossed, it had been annihilated. Kalen stood breathing in the center of the annihilated outpost. The slaughter was complete. Vorlag's warband was already engaged in the bloody work of collecting skulls and rendering down war gear, their harsh laughter a chorus to the crackle of burning promethium. The old hunger his axe was sated for the moment, its demon pulse, a low, contented thrum. But Kalen was not. The red haze, the battle ecstasy, was not receding. Usually the itch would fade to a dull throb after a kill of this magnitude. This time it was intensifying. The pressure behind his eyes, the crawling sensation under his skin was building into a new, unbearable crescendo. Something was wrong. Or something was terribly, terribly right. He looked down at his gauntlets, still dripping with the blood of his past self. A strange, oily sheen was spreading over the skin of his knuckles, visible through the gaps in the armor. His flesh was changing. It was hardening, the texture shifting from human skin to something more like burnished, aged brass. A pins and needles sensation. A million tiny electrical shocks coursed over his entire body. Then the heat began. It started in his chest at the site of his eightfold brand and spread outwards. It was not the heat of an infection or a fever. It was a searing internal fire, as if his very blood was being replaced with molten metal. His armor's cooling systems, which had handled the forge and the heat of battle, suddenly roared vents, blasting steam as they tried to compensate for the impossible supernatural temperature of his own body. He could feel his blood boiling in his veins, a bubbling, raging torrent that matched the fury in his soul. Kalen Vox, he let out a low, agonized groan, clutching his chest. Hot! He ripped his helmet off the seals, hissing. He needed to breathe. He dropped to his knees, his new metallic skin steaming in the cold air. Vorlag and Garkel, their own helms off, approached their faces not of concern, but of a kind of reverent professional curiosity. Vorlag, he stopped a few feet away, his ice-blue eyes narrowed. It is the blessing. The god has seen your work, aspirant. He is pleased. Do not fight it. Let it in. Let it in. Kalen was drowning in it. The world around him began to change. The grey rubble, the tattered green banners, the brass and red of his warband, all of it began to fade, as if a filter was being drawn over his eyes. The colors desaturated, washed out until only one single screaming color remained. Red. The world was now a monochrome landscape of crimson. He saw the fires of the burning bunker not as orange, but as a bright, shimmering scarlet. He saw the blood pools on the ground glowing like beacons. He looked at Vorlag. The champion was not a man of flesh and brass. He was a towering silhouette of pure living red. The blood pumping through his veins, the life force in him. It was a tangible, visible thing. Kalen looked at a pile of Cadian corpses. They were a dull, muted grey. Dead. Irrelevant. He looked at Garkel. Bright red. A target. He looked at his own hands, his new brass-coated skin. Blazing red. A weapon. This was the true sight. This was the world as his god saw it. A simple binary universe. The red living things that could be made to bleed. And the grey dead things that were of no consequence. There were no civilians, no soldiers, no brothers, no enemies. There was only blood, and that which lacked it. His purpose was now visually, undeniably clear. And then the final agony. The brand on his chest, the one Vorlag had given him, exploded. It was not a metaphorical pain. Kalen screamed a raw, lung-tearing sound and arched his back, smashing his power pack against the ground. The 8-pointed star, his mark of initiation, was on fire. A hole the exact shape of the brand burned through the inner lining of his power armor, through the synth-skin undersuit, and into his very flesh. But it was not burning him. It was reforging him. The scar tissue tore open, not to bleed, but to reveal a new, raw wound underneath a self-sustaining sigil of pure, divine rage. It was no longer a brand given to him by a mortal. It was a mark, a gaping, smouldering wound impressed upon his soul, a direct personal brand from the Lord of Skulls himself. Smoke thick and black poured from the collar of his armor, smelling of ozone and sulfur. The pain was absolute, a supernova of agony that eclipsed the branding, the implantation, everything. It was the pain of a god's hand reaching into his chest and squeezing his heart. He roared his voice, no longer human, and slammed his fist into the ferrocrete, cracking it. The red world pulsed around him, thump, thump, thump in time with his own boiling, raging heart. He was no longer Kalen the aspirant. He was not Kalen the spawn breaker. He was a creature of pure, divine hatred, a consecrated instrument of slaughter. He was marked. He was chosen. He was at last a true berserker of Khorne. Kalen got to his feet. His movements were fluid, no longer the staggered, pained motions of a man, but the precise hydraulic grace of a war machine. The mark on his chest smoldered a gateway of raw, divine power pouring into him. The world was a beautiful, simple symphony of red. The living were bright scarlet, the dead were dull grey, and the thump, thump, thump of the god's pulse was the only rhythm he would ever need. He saw the warband bright red beacons of potential blood moving among the grey dead collecting their skull tithe. And he saw Vorlag, a blazing inferno of red, directing the work, his cultured voice, an obscenity in this holy place. A memory flashed in Kalen's mind unbidden. Not a face, not a name, but an act. The memory of Vorlag's voice enough. The memory of the itch being denied. The memory of Garkel's whistling. The memory of waiting to kill the orcs. Waiting, stopping, thinking. These were not the actions of a true champion. They were the actions of a coward, a politician, a weakling who feared the true, glorious, unending rage. Vorlag was not a conduit for the god's will. He was a dam holding it back, rationing it, insulting it with his control, the demon in his axe. Old Hunger sensed his new, focused purpose. It began to howl a low, rising shriek that demanded worthy blood. This was the moment. The mark on his chest burned, and his new red-soaked vision made his path clear. He was the god's chosen. This pretender had to be removed. He began to walk. His heavy iron-shod boots were silent on the bloody ground. The warband parted for him, a sea of red silhouettes, sensing the shift in power. They stopped their work, their heads turning. The air crackled. Vorlag heard the axe howl and turned his ice-blue eyes, narrowing. His hand tightened on Gorefather. Vorlag a hint of his old mocking tone. "You have your reward, aspirant. The god has marked you." "A fine." Kalenvox, his voice was a deep metallic growl, a perfect blend of man-machine and demon-you. He stopped 10 feet from the champion. He was shorter, his armor less ornate, but he was a furnace of raw power, and Vorlag was just a man. "Kalenvox, you are weak." Vorlag's aristocratic mask cracked. The sneer vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, murderous outrage. "Vorlag weak, I who have walked the long war for 1,000 years, I who made you from the mud of your dead world, I will. Kalenvox, you stop the flow. You wait. You speak. You deny the god his blood. You are a warden, not a warrior. Your skull is mine." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. Vorlag threw back his head and laughed a genuine barking sound, but his eyes were cold. He knew the law, the old unchanging law. Vorlag a challenge. The pup would murder its master. So be it. The god will decide, to the altar of skulls. The warband roared. This was the true entertainment. This was how leadership was decided, not by words, but by blood. They formed a vast chanting circle around the outpost's central flagpole, where the largest pile of Cadian skulls was being assembled. Kalen and Vorlag climbed the slick, wet mound until they stood face to face on its unstable peak. "Vorlag, I will enjoy teaching you your final lesson, boy." Kalen did not reply. He just watched. His red sight saw Vorlag as a blazing system of targets. the heart, the throat, the arteries in his arms. The demon axe howled. Vorlag charged first, his twin-headed axe, Gorefather, a blur of intricate, masterful strokes. He was a duelist, his millennia of experience evident in every move. Kalen, in his raw fury, simply raised Old Hunger to block. The impact was a thunderclap. Gorefather, a potent demon weapon in its own right, shrieked as it met Old Hunger. Kalen was driven back a step, the skulls shifting under his boots. Vorlag pressed the attack, his twin axe a whirlwind, striking from left, then right, then high. Kalen was purely on the defensive, his raw strength the only thing keeping him alive. Old Hunger a simple, brutal shield against the storm. Sparks flew as the two demon axes tore at each other. Vorlag, he laughed as he pushed Kalen back, his blade slipping past Kalen's guard and gouging a deep wound in his shoulder plate. All that power and no skill, you are just an animal. Kalen a rabid dog. The word skill echoed in Kalen's mind. It was a Cadian word. It was a word of discipline. And in that moment something shifted. The red haze of his pure rage did not recede, but it sharpened. The old Cadian training, the 30 years of disciplined economical violence, surged and fused with his new divine fury. Analyze, adapt, overcome. He looked at Vorlag again. He saw the champion's movements. Arrogant, overextended. He relied on his strength and the intimidation of his weapon. He was predictable. Vorlag raised Gorefather for a final decapitating blow, roaring in triumph. Kalen moved. He didn't block. He dodged. A Cadian-drilled sidestep that, combined with his new warp-fueled speed, was impossibly fast. Vorlag's axe, expecting resistance, swung wide, burying itself in the skull pile at Kalen's feet. The champion was off balance for a fraction of a second. It was all Kalen needed. He didn't swing his axe. He rammed his shoulder Acadian breeches charge move into Vorlag's chest, the impact cracking the champion's breastplate. Vorlag stumbled, his eyes wide with shock. Kalen reversed Old Hunger, slamming its heavy iron-shod pommel into the side of Vorlag's helmet, a rifle butt stroke to the temple. The helmet buckled. Vorlag staggered, his senses scrambled. He was a master duelist, but he had never faced this, the perfect brutal logic of a Cadian sergeant married to the strength of a marked berserker. Vorlag gasping, trying to raise his axe. You filth. Kalen did not give him the chance. He stepped inside Vorlag's guard just as he had with the first cultist in the trench so long ago. He was too close for Vorlag to swing. He raised Old Hunger high, Kalen Vox weak. He brought the howling axe down, not on Vorlag's head, but on his chest. The fangs of the daemon weapon bit deep, tore through the ancient ceramite, and buried themselves in the champion's heart. The warband fell silent. Vorlag looked down. He saw the massive, roaring axe embedded in his own torso. He saw Kalen's glowing red eye lenses staring at him from inches away. He tried to speak. A gout of blood bubbled from his Vox grill. Kalen Vox, your skull. Kalen braced his boot on Vorlag's breastplate. He did not pull the axe out. He grabbed Vorlag's horned helmet with his free gauntlet, and with a single brutal, tearing motion, he ripped the champion's head and spine from his body. There was a wet, sickening crack that echoed across the silent plaza. Kalen stood on the peak of the skull mound, the headless corpse of Vorlag slumping at his feet. In his left hand, Old Hunger howled its sated, demonic victory song. In his right, he held the dripping, wide-eyed skull of Vorlag the Flayer, its spinal cord dangling like a bloody trophy. He raised the skull to the black, toxic sky. Kalen Vox, a roar that was not a man's, not a machine's, but the voice of the god himself, a skull for the skull throne. He stood there, a crimson silhouette, the new, undisputed master. The daemon axe in his hand was for a moment quiet. It was full silence. Then a single heavy thud. Garkle the veteran berserker slammed the butt of his chain axe onto the bloody ferrocrete, and he knelt. One by one, like dominoes of iron, the entire warband fell to one knee. They did not bow. They did not weep. They knelt in acknowledgement. The god had spoken. The god had chosen. Their new champion was born. Kalen stood on the summit of the skull mound, a crimson colossus against the black, swirling sky. The skull of Vorlag, its spine dangling, was a heavy, cooling weight in his gauntlet. He looked down at the kneeling warband. Through his new mark-given sight, they were not individuals. They were a sea of red, pulsing, vibrant, living silhouettes of potential. They were his. They were a collection of blades, and he was the hand that would wield them. He opened his grip. Vorlag's skull, now a dull, uninteresting grey, tumbled from his grasp, rolling down the gory hillside of its fellows to land in the mud. It was just another piece of the past, as dead and meaningless as Cadia. The warband waited. Their silence was a question. What now? Their former champion had a plan, a strategy, a reason to wait. What would this new, brutal force bring them? Kalen turned his helm from the kneeling warriors. He faced the horizon. The world was a flat, grey wasteland broken by the distant, glowing red of fires. But there, in the far distance, barely a smudge of darkness against the bleeding sky. His red sight saw it for what it truly was. It was not a smudge. It was a mountain of pure, blazing, glorious scarlet, a constellation of billions of red living lights packed so tightly together they formed a single solid beacon of life. A hive city, a feast that would dwarf every slaughter this world had yet seen. A billion throats to cut, a billion skulls to claim. The itch was gone. The agonizing, clawing need had been replaced by a vast, cold purpose. The demon in his axe-old hunger sensed his gaze. It too saw the feast. It began to thrum a low, hungry, impatient vibration that rattled Kalen's arm. It was time to eat. Kalen raised his left gauntlet. Not his axe hand, just his hand. He pointed. His armored finger, still stained with Vorlag's blood, was an iron spike aimed directly at the distant Scarlet Mountain. The warband rose as one, a sound of grinding, scraping iron. They turned, following his gesture. They saw the hive. They understood. Kalen took a deep, rattling breath, his vox grill crackling with static. He gave his first and only order. Kalen Vox. It was not a word. It was a geological event. A command that ripped from his throat, amplified by his helm, and blasted across the plaza with the force of a shockwave. Gort! There was no cheer. There was no tactical discussion. There was only a single unified answering roar. Garkle, his face a mask of joyous, bloody madness, was the first to Kalen's side, his own axe held high. The entire warband, 50 engines of red iron, fell into step behind their new champion. Kalen was the first off the skull mound. He did not climb down. He jumped, landing on the ferrocrete with a boom that cracked the ground. And then he ran. This was not a charge. A charge has a target and objective. This was a force of nature being unleashed. Kalen was not a soldier leading his men. He was the earthquake that starts the avalanche. He was the volcanic pressure that blows the mountain apart. He was a disaster, a thing of pure, mindless, directional rage, and his warband was the tide of magma that followed in his wake. Their boots, 100 iron-shod feet, struck the ground in a ragged, thundering cadence that sounded like artillery. They were a tidal wave of red and brass, a moving wall of slaughter, and Kalen was its crest. He ran with his axe held low, the howling of its demon engine, a siren song that drowned out all other sound. They crossed the ruined plains, their speed inhuman. They did not avoid obstacles, they pulverized them. They smashed through the skeletons of burned-out tanks, they vaulted over collapsed hab blocks. They ran through promethium fires, their blessed armor not even scorching. They were a single unified entity. 50 warriors, one will, one purpose, blood. The hive's outer defenses, a hastily erected line of Imperial Guard conscripts. More children, more ghosts saw them coming. Warning sirens shrieked. Autocannon fire began to thump, thump, thump from the walls. Heavy bolters opened up, spitting a stream of explosive shells. It was a wall of pathetic grey metal striking a tsunami of living red rage. Kalen didn't even slow down. A shell exploded on his pauldron, the force spinning him, but he used the momentum, turning it into a pirouette of violence. He was the first to hit the line. He didn't stop at the barricade. He detonated it. He smashed into the plasteel and rebar wall, and the entire structure vanished. He was among them. His world narrowed to the glorious red silhouettes before him. Old Hunger sang its song. It rose and fell, a blur of motion. A man red raised a lasgun grey. The axe descended, and the man became a cloud of red mist and grey fragments. Another red thrust with a bayonet grey. Kalen grabbed the rifle, tore it from the man's hands, and impaled him with his own weapon before his axe came around and took the man's head. He was in a state of perfect divine clarity. He was not fighting, he was harvesting. The warband hit the line a second after him, and the defense evaporated. It was a feeding frenzy. The battle sounds were a symphony, the roar of chain axes, the wet thud of bodies, the high-pitched screams of the dying, and the deep, booming laughter of the berserkers. Kalen stood in the breach, his armor drenched in fresh, hot blood. He looked at the chaos he had unleashed. And as the arterial spray from a guardsman's severed neck jetted across his bare, brass-skinned face, he heard it. It was not in his head. It was not the pulse. It was not the axe demon's whisper. It was a sound in the sky. It was a deep, booming, joyous laughter. It was a sound like a billion brass mountains grinding together, a sound of pure, unadulterated, satisfied approval that echoed from the blood-red skies of the warp itself. It was a laugh that shook the foundations of reality, a laugh that acknowledged the glorious, beautiful, perfect slaughter he had begun. Khorne, the blood god, he was watching, and he was pleased. Kalen, his face a mask of gore, his red eyes blazing, tilted his head back to the screaming sky. He did not bow. He did not pray. He raised his dripping axe, Old Hunger, and he roared back his own metallic, inhuman laughter, joining the glorious, booming chorus of his god. The transformation was complete. The endless roar had begun. The breach was a smoking, 100-meter-wide canyon of shattered plasteel and flesh. The screams of the dying had for the most part faded, replaced by the crackle of 1,000 fires and the harsh, guttural laughter of the warband. Kalen stood at the epicenter on the ruined peak of what had been the Outer Bastion's command bunker. It was a small hill of pulverized concrete and mangled corpses, a fitting throne from which to survey his new kingdom of slaughter. Below him, his warriors were celebrating in the only way they knew how. Garkul and 2 other berserkers were in a bloody triangular brawl within a massive shell crater, their axes ringing against each other's armor as they fought for the right to claim the skull of a fallen Lehman Russ tank commander. Others were dragging captured, wounded conscripts still glowing red to Kalen's sight, to a central pile building a new, living altar for their god. They were a force of pure chaos, a pack of alpha predators, and he was their master. He stood apart, unmoving. His helmet's external vox was offline, the roar of his pack muffled by his own breathing. Old Hunger was heavy in his gauntlets, its demon engine idling with a low, sated, digestive growl. The howl had faded. The red tide of his battle fury, the divine rage that had carried him through the wall, was ebbing. And for one single terrifying second, the world changed. The red sight, the mark-given vision that simplified the world into blood and not blood, flickered. Like a failing glow globe, it sputtered, and the true colors of the world seeped back in. He saw the black, oily smoke. He saw the gray of the shattered concrete. He saw the deep, dark, congealing maroon of the blood drying on his own brass-skinned hands. The thump, thump, thump in his skull, the constant driving war drum of his god, faded to a distant, muffled echo. He was alone in the quiet. He looked at the carnage. He looked at the axe in his hands, the tool that had carved his path from Cadian mud to this, the pinnacle of his new life. He was a champion. He was a conqueror. He had power. He waited to feel the corresponding emotion. Glory there was none. Satisfaction? The kill was already cold. Pride was a word for men like Vorlag, and Vorlag was dead. He felt nothing. There was no joy. There was no remorse. There was no hatred. There was no love. He tried to remember the face of the young sergeant he had bisected the face of his own past. It was gone. He tried to summon the triumph of his victory over Vorlag. It was not there. He was a vessel. He was a weapon. And the battle was, for this brief moment, over. A weapon returned to its sheath has no purpose. It feels no triumph. It just is. He was an empty, hollowed-out thing, a suit of iron and rage with a void at its center. This was his reward. This was the peace he had earned. A vast, cold, sterile, and absolute emptiness. The silence was deafening. The stillness was a torment worse than any pain. This was the true hell. Not fire, but inaction. And then deep in the hollow void, a single spark. Thump. A sound. A feeling. The echo was returning. Thump, thump. The cold in his core began to warm. The silence was broken. Thump, 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 thump! The war drum slammed back into his consciousness, a physical, jarring blow. The red sight snapped back into place, the grey, dead world vanishing, instantly replaced by the glorious, vibrant scarlet. The emptiness was filled, flooded, annihilated by the returning, familiar, wonderful itch. The pressure built behind his eyes, the need to move, to break, to kill. The daemon in his axe woke up. Its low growl returned, no longer sated but starving. It was hungry again. He was hungry again. He looked up from his axe past his brawling warriors. He looked deep into the hive city, into the miles-deep canyon of hab blocks that stretched before him. It was a mountain of red, a galaxy of red, a feast that had barely been touched. The slaughter of the outer wall was not a victory. It was an appetizer. The itch was a raging inferno. The hunger was endless. And that, too, was his reward. Kalen, the champion of Khorne, raised his howling axe, its fangs spinning, and took his first heavy step towards the feast. Narrator. The voice like grinding stones, ancient and indifferent, returns. And so the transformation is complete. The man who was Sergeant Kalen, the soldier of Cadia, is dead. He was not killed by an orbital strike, or a marauder's blade, or a berserker's challenge. He was killed by a single simple truth, that in a galaxy of gods and monsters of lies and decaying empires, there is no greater power than the rage in a single heart. Narrator. He has achieved everything he ever truly wanted. When the Emperor's hollow promise of protection failed him, he sought the strength to protect himself. Khorne gave it to him, encasing him in demonic iron. When the Imperium's rigid discipline proved a lie, he sought the freedom to act on his own will. Khorne gave it to him, making him a champion, a master of his own warband. He has power. He has purpose. He has, in his own terrible way, been granted salvation. Narrator. But the Lord of Skulls is a god of honest, brutal bargains. There are no hidden clauses, no deceptive promises. The price is written in blood for all to see. Kalen sought strength, and he was made strong. But that strength is a furnace that must be eternally fed. He sought freedom, and he was made free. But that freedom is the freedom of an avalanche, which is free only to fall to destroy until it is itself destroyed. He has not escaped his chains. He has merely traded the iron shackles of duty for the burning brass chains of rage. He has become a slave to the itch, a puppet dancing on the strings of his own fury, a perfect, mindless instrument of a thirst that can never, ever be slaked. Narrator. He will kill, he will conquer, he will carve a path of red through the heart of the hive, and perhaps through 100 hives after. He will pile skulls so high they blot out the stars, and he will never feel satisfaction. He will never feel peace. He will only feel the brief, agonizing moment of emptiness, followed by the familiar, driving, endless hunger. This is his reward. This is his eternal curse. Narrator. And in time his destiny will be fulfilled. A new challenger will rise, a stronger orc, a faster Eldar, a more brutal champion. He will be slowed by a lucky shot. He will misjudge a parry. His endless rage will be met by a cold, precise skill, or simply a greater, more explosive rage. His head will be taken. His skull, the skull of the Spawn Breaker, the Skull Taker of X-19, will be claimed and placed upon a pike. Narrator and the Lord of the Skull Throne will not care. He will not mourn. He will not even notice. Kaelin's purpose will have been served. The victor's skull will be taken by another, and his by another, in a glorious, unending chain of slaughter that feeds the master of the hunt. Kaelin was a single drop of rain in an eternal crimson storm. His only victory was that he chose to fall rather than to simply evaporate. Because the blood god does not care who bleeds. He only cares that the blood flows. Kaelin, his mind empty of all thought, save the red, screaming need that was his only reality, stood at the gaping maw of the hive city. The screams of its billion red souls were a beautiful, welcoming chorus. His warband, a tide of roaring crimson, was already pouring into the canyon streets behind him, their axes singing. He looked at the feast before him. He raised old hunger. The demon within the axe was a part of him now, its hunger, and his indistinguishable. He opened his mouth, his new brass-like face contorting into a mask of perfect divine rage. The sound that erupted from his vox grill was not a human cry. It was not a word of command. It was the roar of a weapon being fired, the roar of a star collapsing, the roar of an engine of slaughter pointed at its singular, endless purpose. It was the final, unending roar of a perfect slave. He plunged into the darkness of the hive, and the harvest began.